It is June 25th, 1950. Seoul's morning streets hum with the sounds of ordinary life now. Office workers rush to catch streetcars while vendors set up beneath the warm summer sun. In 72 hours, this city of 1.5 million becomes a burning battlefield. The people walking these streets have no idea what terrible horror is about to strike them. This is the story of Seoul's annihilation in the bloodiest war of modern Asian history, and how Seoul rose from ashes to become one of Earth's greatest superpower cities today. Before catastrophe struck, Seoul ruled as Korea's imperial capital for 5 long centuries. The Joseon Dynasty built magnificent palaces with curved tile roofs beginning in year 1394. Gyeongbokgung Palace stood at the heart, its throne hall a masterpiece of wooden craft. Stone fortress walls wrapped around narrow alleys filled with traditional hanok houses. By 1950, Seoul existed caught between two worlds, the imperial past and stark modernity. Japanese colonial rule ended 5 years before, leaving behind strange and hybrid traces. Streetcars ran on steel tracks past ancient gates where scholars gathered for examinations. Students in Western uniforms walked beside elderly men wearing white hanbok and black hats. The Han River flowed silver through the valley, crossed by several sturdy steel bridges. Seoul was poor and crowded, dusty and struggling, but it was alive and unmistakably Korean. At 4 in the morning on June 25th, everything changed in one devastating, violent moment. North Korean forces with Soviet T-34 tanks crashed across the 38th parallel dividing line. The invasion was devastating. A carefully planned blitzkrieg executed with brutal precision. Within hours, South Korean defensive positions began collapsing under the mechanized assault. By June 27th, the thunder of artillery echoed ominously in Seoul's northern city districts. Panic erupted as the terrible reality became impossible for anyone to deny in those streets. Communist forces were coming fast, and nothing could stop them from reaching the capital. Families grabbed children and whatever they could carry, joining the desperate exodus south. The roads became rivers of humanity flowing desperately toward the Han River bridges below. Tens of thousands fled with nothing but clothes on their backs and terror-filling hearts. On June 28th came one of the war's most horrific tragedies and terrible tactical mistakes. South Korean engineers detonated the main Hangang Bridge to slow the enemy's southward push. But hundreds of refugees still crossed when explosives detonated without any warning at all. They fell screaming into dark water below, and most drowned in the cold river's swift current. Seoul fell to communist forces that terrible day, June 28th, just 3 days after war began. For 90 days the city existed under harsh occupation, its people living in constant fear. September brought the daring assault at Incheon, catching the enemy forces by total surprise. American and South Korean forces fought back into Seoul through vicious, brutal urban combat. Artillery and tank shells turned city blocks into skeletal ruins of shattered concrete steel. Buildings standing for centuries became piles of rubble in minutes under relentless shelling. By September 28th, when Seoul was retaken, more than half the structures stood utterly destroyed. Entire neighborhoods reduced to nothing but rubble, ash, and scattered broken brick piles. But the nightmare was only beginning. The war still had 3 brutal years left to run ahead. In January 1951, a massive Chinese offensive pushed the United Nations forces back southward. Seoul fell for the second time, becoming a frozen ghost city as all residents fled into winter. The city changed hands 4 times in 12 months, each bringing more fresh destruction. Artillery duels reduced neighborhoods to moonscapes of craters and scattered debris mountains. Fires burned for days in districts where no one remained alive to put out the spreading flames. By July 1953, when the armistice was signed, Seoul had become unrecognizable to everyone. Over 100,000 civilians had perished in fighting, occupation, or winter evacuations. Nearly 90% of the city's industrial infrastructure had been demolished completely. What remained in 1953 was a city existing only in name and in painful collective memory then. Entire districts like Jongno and Myeongdong had been leveled to scattered brick foundations. The grand palaces were blackened ruins with collapsed roofs and shattered columns in courtyards. Gyeongbokgung, symbol of 5 centuries of Korean sovereignty, now stood gutted and silent. Families lived in desperate shelters cobbled together from corrugated metal sheets and timbers. There was no water system. People drew water daily from the polluted Han River down below. Electricity was almost gone. The nights were dark and cold and filled with sounds of grief. The bridges were gone, replaced by rickety temporary pontoons swaying under people's weight. Seoul in 1953 was not a living city. It was an open wound that refused to heal over time. Against all logic and odds, Seoul refused to die a quiet, forgotten death in those dark years. In years following the armistice, something miraculous began happening in those shattered ruins. The Korean people, exhausted and traumatized but unbroken, decided to rebuild their capital city. Aid flowed from the United States, United Nations, and international relief organizations, but the real work was done by Korean hands. Men and women working 12-hour daily shifts, hard. They cleared rubble and salvaged bricks from collapsed buildings for new foundation construction. They poured concrete for roads and raised timber frames for schools and shops and new markets. President Syngman Rhee launched ambitious reconstruction plans despite having empty treasuries. Brick by brick, street by street, building by building, Seoul slowly clawed back toward life. By the early 60s, Seoul was no longer recovering. It was transforming itself completely. Under Park Chung-hee, South Korea embarked on rapid, state-directed industrialization programs. Factories sprouted like steel forests along the Han riverbanks, producing textiles, electronics. New highways cut through the city, replacing narrow, winding roads of the old Joseon Dynasty. Entire neighborhoods were bulldozed and rebuilt according to strict modern urban planning rules. High-rise apartment blocks replaced wooden structures in systematic waves of urban redevelopment. The population exploded at a rate almost unprecedented in modern human history anywhere on Earth. In 1960, Seoul had 2.5 million people living within its expanding city boundaries. By 1970, that number doubled to over 5 million souls packed tightly into the new districts. The city grew faster than almost any other place on the planet during that remarkable decade. Rural Koreans poured into the capital, seeking jobs in new factories that promised better futures. Transformation accelerated through the boom years of the 80s and 90s dramatically. Seoul was selected to host the 1988 Summer Olympics, a moment of profound symbolic importance. The entire world watched as the once-destroyed capital showcased gleaming new Olympic stadiums. Skyscrapers began climbing toward clouds in the new financial district of Uido River Island. The Seoul Metro subway expanded into one of the cleanest and most advanced systems on Earth. Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and dozens of powerful chaebol conglomerates established global headquarters. The Han River was transformed, its banks lined with beautiful riverside parks and pedestrian paths. Futuristic bridges lit with LED lights at night connected the districts across the flowing water. Seoul became a genuine global economic powerhouse, the engine driving South Korea's rapid miracle. Today, in 2026, Seoul is home to nearly 10 million people living within the city limits proper. Its metro area holds over 25 million souls, approximately half of South Korea's population. It is the fourth largest metro economy in the world by GDP, ahead of both London and Paris. Korean pop music, dramas, cinema, fashion, and food radiate outward from Seoul to every corner. Neon signs blaze 24 hours daily in wealthy Gangnam, while tech startups fill Hongdae. The ancient palaces like Gyeongbokgung and Changdeokgung stand restored and carefully protected. They're surrounded by gleaming towers of glass and steel, reaching toward clouds and distant stars. The city that was rubble 70 years ago is now a global symbol of human resilience, completely. Seoul rose from destruction, not because it forgot the pain of what happened in those war years. The scars remain visible in the demilitarized zone cutting across the peninsula 30 miles north, in memories of elderly survivors who remember the sound of artillery and smell of burning wood. But Seoul chose to build forward relentlessly, rather than remain paralyzed, looking backward forever. It became a city proving what sheer human will and determination can achieve against impossible odds. A city refusing to be defined by its worst moments, but by its incredible, miraculous comeback story. The story is not finished. Seoul continues evolving and reinventing itself with each passing year. Like and subscribe, because Seoul's rise is one of the most remarkable chapters in human history. The transformation from rubble to glory took only 40 years, less than a single human lifetime. Seoul today stands as proof that cities, like people, can rise stronger after total devastation. The Korean spirit of hurry, pali, drove the reconstruction at astonishing pace. What was impossible became inevitable because an entire nation refused to accept defeat as final. This is Seoul's miracle, and that miracle continues every single day in the streets of this unstoppable city.